He was born to protect the empire. Instead, he exposed it. The first thing Eric noticed about the Wharfside site was the heavy, deliberate silence, the kind that only exists when a multi-million-dollar machine is forced to a halt. Eric stepped out of the black company car wearing a fluorescent safety vest and a white helmet that did not belong to him. He had introduced himself at the gate as an external safety inspector. The guard barely checked the badge. Money builds trust faster than credentials. Officially, Eric was operations director. Unofficially, he was a subordinate under Eleanor Whitmore's absolute control. Wharfside was meant to be his proof of competence, but now it was a frozen liability. Walking past the dormant machinery, he found the cause, a woman chained to a centuries-old oak. She wasn't shouting. She was reading a tablet. "This is illegal," Eric said. The woman, Cleo didn't look up. "So is a drainage plan that ignores a 12% flood risk increase," she countered. She cited municipal infrastructure costs and soil mechanics with a precision that bypassed slogans for raw data. Eric, stripped of his safety inspector facade by her sharp assessment, finally admitted his identity. "I'm here to understand why my project is stalled," he said. Cleo's eyes narrowed. "Whitmore," she said, recognizing the surname like a structural flaw. Eric felt the weight of his surname like a brand on his forehead. Around them, the world was silent as Cleo challenged him. "Do you actually believe this benefits the city?" she asked. Eric offered the corporate script: jobs, revitalization, evolution. Cleo dismantled it with 3 words: outsourced, displaced, campaign-funded. For the first time, Eric removed his helmet. "What do you want?" "A redesign," she said. "Mixed income, green corridors, phased infrastructure. Profitable, just less obscene." The word obscene stuck. He should have called security. Instead, he was calculating externalities. "You're costing us thousands an hour," he noted. "Good," she replied. "Maybe you'll finally learn to account for the hidden costs." It came from preparation. He realized she had expected someone like him to show up. She had prepared arguments not for the police, but for decision-makers. "If I asked you to present this to the board," he said slowly, "would you?" A murmur went through the small group of activists. Cleo did not look at them. "In a transparent setting," she said. "Not a stage performance." He almost smiled at that. If she only knew how carefully his mother curated every dialogue. "You assume I have authority," he said. "You do," she answered. "You just don't use it." The statement landed deeper than any accusation could. Eric felt exposed. Not as an executive, as a son. Eleanor had built the corporation from nothing. She respected strength and despised hesitation. Eric had grown up learning that compromise was weakness. Yet here, standing before a chained activist who spoke in spreadsheets, he felt the first crack in that doctrine. "Unchain yourself," he said quietly. "Give me 48 hours. Cleo studied him, measuring risk. 48, she repeated. "And if nothing changes?" "Then I'll come back," he said. "And you can chain yourself again." The promise was an impulse, unvetted by legal. Cleo studied him, then signaled a student to unlock the chain. As the metal clattered to the ground, Eric felt a rare sense of engagement. 48 hours, Mr. Whitmore," she said, rubbing her wrists. "After that, we escalate." Walking away, Eric didn't call security or his mother. Instead, he opened the project's financial projections and began recalculating for sustainability rather than extraction. Behind him, Cleo watched in silence, both unaware they had just triggered the first fracture in the Whitmore empire. Eric did not sleep that night. He lay in his glass-walled apartment overlooking the financial district and replayed every sentence Cleo had spoken beneath the oak. Not the slogans, the margins, the flood risk percentage, the phased infrastructure tie-ins. She had not attacked him personally. She had attacked the model. That unsettled him more than outrage would have. At 7:30 a.m., Eleanor Whitmore called. She never texted. "Status," she said without greeting. "Site stabilized," Eric replied. "Activists dispersed temporarily." "Temporarily?" Her tone sharpened. 48 hours, he said. Silence. He could almost hear her recalculating risk. "You have 24, she corrected. "Investors are restless. If we push too hard, we trigger media escalation," he said carefully. "Let me manage it." A pause. "Do not confuse management with sympathy, Eric," she replied, and ended the call. By late afternoon, he found himself standing outside a basement cafe 3 streets away from Wharfside. The sign above the narrow staircase reads simply, "Basement Coffee." No branding strategy. No curated aesthetic. Inside, exposed pipes ran along the ceiling. The tables were mismatched. Students occupied half of them, laptops open, voices low but intense. Cleo sat near the back wall with a stack of printed documents and a chipped mug. She looked up as he approached. No chain this time. No oak. Just fluorescent lighting and the smell of burnt espresso. "You came," she said. "You expected police?" he asked. "I expected silence." He pulled out a chair. "I read your proposal." That was not entirely true. He had dissected it. "And your infrastructure staging is feasible," he admitted. "But the board will reject lower margins." She leaned back. "Then your board lacks imagination." "Or accountability," he countered. "Public companies answer to shareholders. Cities answer to residents," she replied. He noticed the activists at neighboring tables watching discreetly. He removed his coat, deliberately ordinary. "I'm not here as Whitmore," he said. "Call me Rick." Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "Rebranding. Compartmentalization," he answered. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Fine, Rick. Sit. We're drafting a petition revision." For the next 2 hours, he did something he had not done in years. He listened without commanding the room. They debated zoning clauses. He suggested alternative phrasing to avoid defamation exposure. He corrected a misinterpretation of a municipal procurement rule. Cleo watched him with increasing curiosity. "You've done this before," she said. "Corporate compliance," he replied lightly. That was true, though incomplete. As evening settled, the cafe emptied until only a few of them remained. One of the students left to catch a train. Another closed a laptop with a sigh. Cleo gathered the pages into a neat stack. "Why help us?" she asked quietly. He considered lying. Instead, he said, "Because you're not wrong." The honesty surprised them both. "That's dangerous," she replied. "For you. I'm aware." She folded her arms. "What's the catch?" "There isn't one. There's always one." He almost smiled. "Maybe I'm tired of signing documents that erase people I've never met." The confession hung between them. She did not soften. "People like the residents at Wharfside?" "Yes. You approved that demolition schedule." "I know." The air shifted. Not hostile. Heavy. Cleo looked at him as if trying to decide whether remorse was genuine or strategic. "Do you understand what eviction letters do to families?" she asked. "Financially, yes," he answered. Emotionally, he hesitated. "Not until recently." She leaned forward. "Come tomorrow. Community meeting. No titles. No speeches. Just listen. If I'm recognized, then you'll experience public opinion unfiltered." A faint challenge in her tone. He nodded. "I'll be there." They left the cafe together. The street outside was damp from evening rain. Neon reflections shimmered in puddles. For a moment they walked in silence. "Rick," she said finally, testing the name. "If you're playing a long game, understand something. We don't have the resources to recover from betrayal." He met her gaze. Understood. She searched his face for irony and found none. The next evening, he stood in a cramped community hall filled with folding chairs and restless residents. He wore no suit jacket, no cufflinks, a gray sweater. Cleo facilitated the discussion with measured control. One by one, residents described rent increases, relocation anxiety, generational ties to the neighborhood. Eric felt the abstraction dissolve. These were not line items. They were voices. Afterward, as people filtered out, Cleo approached him. "Still think it's just about margins?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "No." She studied him in the fluorescent afterglow. "Careful, Rick. Empathy is expensive in your world." "Maybe it's undervalued," he replied. She almost smiled, but did not. "We meet again tomorrow," she said. "Basement coffee. Bring data, not apologies." He watched her leave and realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, he felt intellectually alive. Not because he was winning, because he was being challenged without deference. Back in his apartment that night, he opened internal project files and began drafting alternative projections under a new private folder labeled WS Revision. He did not tell himself he was betraying the corporation. He told himself he was optimizing long-term viability. But beneath that justification lay a simpler truth. He wanted to prove to Cleo that power could choose differently. And he wanted, perhaps selfishly, to see if she would look at him one day without suspicion. Outside, the city lights flickered across the river near Wharfside. The oak still stood. For now. Eleanor Whitmore's invitation arrived as a community dialogue initiative, polished, neutral, and strategically warm. Cleo read the email twice at basement coffee. "It's a trap," a student warned. "Of course it is," Cleo replied. "That's why we go prepared." Eric hadn't known about it until breakfast, when Eleanor casually mentioned her olive branch to the girl with the tree. "Transparency is fashionable this quarter," she'd said. "Investors adore the optics of dialogue." Eric understood what that meant. The event would not be a discussion. It would be choreography. "Don't go," he told Cleo quietly once the others stepped outside to take calls. "If I don't," she said, "she frames us as unreasonable. She will control the room." "She always controls the room," Cleo replied. "That's why we changed the narrative." He hesitated. "You won't like what you see." She studied him. Is that a warning or guilt? Both. The evening of the event, the venue glowed with curated sophistication. A private hall overlooking the river, glass walls, subdued lighting, waiters moving like silent punctuation. Cleo arrived in a dark tailored jacket, hair pulled back, posture steady. She refused to look intimidated. Conversations hushed subtly as she entered. Investors recognized her face from local coverage. Some smiled with professional curiosity, others with mild irritation. At the front of the room sat the executive panel. Eleanor in a structured ivory suit, the mayor beside her, two major shareholders, and Eric, in a charcoal suit, composed, elevated above the audience by a low platform that might as well have been a wall. For a fraction of a second, Cleo's composure cracked. Not visibly, but internally. Rick was gone. In his place sat Eric Whitmore, heir apparent, reviewing printed notes. Their eyes met across the room. He did not look away. That made it worse. Eleanor began with measured charm. "We value civic engagement," she said smoothly. "Growth must coexist with responsibility." Applause. Controlled. She spoke of jobs, revitalization, future opportunity. Then she pivoted. "To ensure transparency, I've asked my son, our operations director, to present updated projections." Eric's hands tightened around the paper. The speech had been drafted by legal and approved by Eleanor personally. It emphasized economic necessity. It framed opposition as emotionally driven but statistically marginal. It justified accelerated demolition to prevent financial instability. Cleo felt the floor tilt as he stood. This was the moment. He could refuse. He could deviate. He could say the margins were flexible. Instead, he began reading. His voice was steady, controlled. He cited employment forecasts, tax revenue increases, strategic urban modernization. He did not look at her while he spoke about clearing underutilized residential zones. The phrase landed like a blade. Cleo lifted her phone and pressed record. Around her, several attendees did the same, but for different reasons. Some wanted evidence of corporate confidence. She wanted proof of betrayal. Eric reached the section he had argued against privately that afternoon. The accelerated timeline. The necessity of immediate demolition to reassure markets. He heard his own voice say the words. Each sentence felt like cement sealing a door. When he finished, applause filled the room. Eleanor's smile was subtle but victorious. Cleo stood without waiting for the moderated Q&A. "May I respond?" she asked clearly. Eleanor inclined her head as if granting a gift. Briefly, Cleo did not approach the stage. She remained on the floor, physically lower, but morally unyielding. "Your projections ignore long-term infrastructure burden," she said. "They assume no flood event exceeding historical averages. They externalize maintenance costs beyond your exit horizon." Murmurs spread. Eric felt heat rise under his collar. She was correct. Again, Eleanor's expression remained serene. "We rely on expert consultants," she replied. "As do we," Cleo said evenly. "Independent ones." The tension sharpened. But the architecture of the evening had already done its work. The visual narrative was set. Corporate leadership unified. Activist dissent isolated. Cleo lowered her phone only after Eric resumed his seat beside his mother. She did not wait for catering or networking. She left. Outside, the river reflected the building's gold light in fractured lines. Her hands trembled only once she reached the sidewalk. Not from humiliation. From clarity. Rick had never existed. Or if he had chosen power. Inside the hall, Eleanor leaned slightly toward her son. "Well delivered," she murmured. "Conviction suits you." Eric stared ahead. "You set this up," he said quietly. "Of course," she replied. "Leadership is tested under scrutiny." "You blindsided her." "I exposed her position to capital," Eleanor corrected. "There is a difference." He did not answer. He felt the fracture widen inside him. Later that night, Cleo uploaded the video. She captioned it with restrained fury. "When corporate heirs pretend to listen. Wharfside deserves honesty." Within an hour, the clip began circulating. By midnight, Eric Whitmore's face had become synonymous with polished indifference. And somewhere between investor applause and online outrage, the fragile bridge built in a basement cafe collapsed without a sound. By morning, Eric's name was trending across social platforms that thrived on moral clarity. The clip of his speech looped endlessly, his surgical tone and the phrase, "underutilized residential zones stripped of context to look heartless." Communications sent him a crisis memo at 6:12 a.m. suggested responses. Approved hashtags. A reminder not to engage emotionally. Eleanor called at 6:15. "Do nothing," she said. "Outrage has a short half-life." "She thinks I betrayed her," Eric replied. "Did you?" Eleanor asked. Silence answered for him. "Perception," she continued, "is leverage. Do not surrender it." He ended the call without promising compliance. Across the city, Cleo's phone would not stop vibrating. Interviews. Invitations. Strangers thanking her for exposing corporate duplicity. Her followers multiplied by the hour. The narrative hardened quickly. She had trusted a man who pretended to stand with them while defending demolition in a tailored suit. Friends sent her screenshots of Eric's face turned into memes. She did not laugh. Anger is clean when it is public. It is complicated when it is personal. That afternoon, Eric went to basement coffee anyway. The bell above the door rang, and conversations faltered. Cleo did not look up immediately. When she did, her expression was not explosive. It was closed. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know." He remained standing. No chair offered. "The speech was strategic," he began. "Strategic?" Her voice sharpened. "You validated demolition." "To buy time," he said. "Investors were threatening to withdraw. If they panic, my mother accelerates everything." "So you sacrifice credibility instead?" she asked. "You think that helps us?" "If I had refused publicly, she would have replaced me by morning." "Maybe she should," Cleo replied. The students around them pretended to work while listening to every word. Eric lowered his voice. "There are internal revisions in progress. Real ones. Under whose authority? Mine." She let out a short, humorless breath. "You stood beside her." "I had to." "No," Cleo said evenly. "You chose to." The distinction cut. He tried once more. "The text was drafted to stabilize shareholders. It prevents immediate liquidation pressure." "And in the meantime?" she asked. "Residents pack boxes?" He had no clean answer. "You don't get to play both sides," she continued. "Not when eviction notices are real." He felt the weight of the room's judgment. "I didn't expect applause," he said quietly. "I expected you to improvise," she replied. "You didn't." The simplicity of it ended the debate. She stood. "We're filing an expanded petition tomorrow. Without your help." He nodded once. "Understood. Don't contact me again." She blocked him before he reached the door. By evening, the backlash intensified. Editorials labeled him the polished face of generational greed. Old photos surfaced. Articles dissected his education, his salary, his inheritance. Protesters gathered outside corporate headquarters with printed stills from the video. Eleanor convened an emergency strategy meeting. "Lean into stability," she instructed. "Portray him as decisive." "Public sentiment is deteriorating," the PR director warned. "Sentiment does not vote at shareholder meetings," Eleanor replied. Eric listened in silence. He had always believed reputation was managed through numbers. Now he understood it could evaporate in hours. Late that night, he stood alone in his apartment, scrolling through thousands of comments. Some vicious, some articulate, some simply disappointed. One message, buried among them, unsettled him most. It was from a Wharfside resident. "We thought you were listening." He closed the app. The city outside hummed indifferent to scandal. He realized something irreversible had happened. Cleo no longer saw potential in him. The activists saw an enemy. His mother saw utility. And he stood between those definitions with diminishing ground beneath his feet. The cancellation was not just digital. It was relational. Trust, once fractured publicly, calcifies quickly. And Eric understood that repairing it would require more than explanation. It would require loss. Eleanor did not retaliate immediately. She preferred to wait for the outrage to peak, knowing it was easier to redirect a wave than to fight it. 3 days after the video scandal, Cleo received another message from Whitmore Corporation. This one was different. No invitation to dialogue. No panel. A formal offer. Position: Environmental Strategy Consultant for Wharfside Redevelopment. Salary: 6 figures. Private office. Direct reporting line to the executive board. Condition: Public endorsement of the revised development plan. Cleo read the document in silence at the long wooden table inside Basement Coffee. The activists around her reacted instantly. It's a buyout. They want your face. This legitimizes them. Cleo did not respond. Her nonprofit fund had 2 months of operational runway left. Grants were delayed. Legal consultations were draining reserves. Idealism does not pay rent for organizers. She forwarded the offer to her lawyer. Then she stared at the number again. It was more than she had earned in 3 years combined. Across the city, Eric walked into his mother's office without knocking. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like a conquest. Eleanor stood behind her desk, reviewing contracts. You offered her a position, he said. Not a question. Yes. She did not look up. You're attempting to neutralize her. I am integrating her, Eleanor corrected. Talented critics are most effective when redirected. You're asking her to publicly support demolition. I am offering influence from within. On your terms. Eleanor finally raised her eyes. Calm. Analytical. Every system has terms. He stepped closer. You're weaponizing her credibility. I am monetizing opposition, she said simply. It is efficient. The bluntness stunned him. And if she refuses? He asked. Then she confirms what investors already suspect. Eleanor replied. That activists prefer outrage to responsibility. Eric felt anger rise, sharp and unfamiliar. She believes in this. Belief is flexible under financial pressure, Eleanor said. You should know. The implication landed. He had chosen position over defiance. She assumed Cleo would do the same. That evening, Cleo requested a private meeting. Not at the cafe. Not at headquarters. A neutral public park bench overlooking the river near Wharfside. Eric arrived first. He no longer wore corporate suits outside work hours. The shift was subtle but deliberate. Cleo approached with the offer letter folded in her coat pocket. She did not sit immediately. Did you know? She asked. Yes, he answered. Did you support it? A pause. No. She studied him carefully, searching for manipulation. It's a golden cage, she said. An office with glass walls and no leverage. You'd have access to internal data, he said. Curated data, she corrected. Filtered through legal. He nodded slowly. Probably. She finally sat. The river moved behind them, indifferent. My fund is collapsing, she admitted quietly. We can't sustain legal resistance without resources. The vulnerability was restrained, but real. She calculated that. Eric said. Of course she did. Silence stretched. If you accept, he said carefully, you gain proximity. And lose independence, she finished. Publicly endorsing a project I oppose destroys credibility. Unless you reshape it from inside. She turned toward him sharply. You think she'll allow that? He did not answer immediately. Not easily, he said at last. Then why are we even discussing this? She asked. He exhaled slowly. Because rejecting it has consequences too. She folded her arms. You mean bankruptcy? Yes. The word hung heavy. For the first time since the gala, their conflict was not ideological. It was strategic. If I accept, she said, people will say I sold out. If you refuse, he replied, she frames you as irrational. Cleo laughed softly, without humor. She's good. She built an empire, he said. Empires collapse, Cleo replied. He looked at her then, really looked. Tired eyes. Determined posture. The woman who had chained herself to an oak now being offered 6 figures to unchain her convictions. What do you want? He asked quietly. She did not answer immediately. I want the neighborhood protected, she said. Not symbolically. Structurally. Then take the meeting, he said. But don't sign. She watched him carefully. You're asking me to pretend. I'm asking you to delay. Delay what? Her consolidation. The wind shifted across the riverbank. In the distance, the oak still stood. You're changing, she said suddenly. Or breaking, he replied. A faint, almost reluctant softness touched her expression. If I walk into that building, she said, it won't be for money. I know. She stood. Tell your mother this, she added. If she thinks I can be purchased, she underestimates what I value. He gave a small nod. She underestimates very few people, he said. Then she's about to learn, Cleo replied. As she walked away, Eric understood something with uncomfortable clarity. Eleanor had expected the offer to fracture Cleo. Instead, it had clarified the battlefield. And for the first time, he realized that neutrality was no longer possible. He would either become his mother's instrument or her liability. Cleo accepted the meeting at Whitmore headquarters but did not sign the contract. She arrived precisely on time, wearing the same dark jacket she had worn to the investor gala. Not armor. Memory. Eleanor greeted her in a glass conference room overlooking the river, expression composed, voice warm enough to be mistaken for sincerity. Miss Marin, she said, I admire resilience. Cleo sat without waiting to be invited. Resilience isn't compliance, she replied. A flicker of amusement crossed Eleanor's face. Of course not. That's why I'm offering collaboration. The contract lay on the table between them. Heavy paper. Heavy implication. Public endorsement, Cleo said evenly. That's your condition. Public reassurance, Eleanor corrected. Markets require stability. Residents require housing, Cleo countered. Eleanor folded her hands. Influence is more effective from inside an institution than outside its gates. Only if the institution allows influence, Cleo replied. Their eye contact held. Neither blinked first. Outside the glass wall, employees moved efficiently through corridors, unaware that the direction of Wharfside hinged on this conversation. Eric observed from the far end of the room, silent, officially present as operations director, unofficially measuring every word. Take 24 hours, Eleanor said finally. Consider the opportunity. Cleo stood. I already have, she said. She left without shaking hands. The elevator doors closed, and only then did Eric speak. She won't endorse demolition. Eleanor did not look concerned. Everyone endorses survival, she replied. That night, Eric made a decision that did not pass through committee. He returned to headquarters after most staff had left. Using senior partner credentials granted to him as operations director, he accessed internal compliance archives, environmental audits, contractor correspondence, engineering risk assessments never included in public summaries. He did not hack. He did not bypass security. He simply opened files his title allowed him to see and copied what he was never meant to circulate. The files confirmed the worst: improper soil disposal and floodplain risks intentionally minimized for approval. As Eric transferred the data to an encrypted drive, he ignored the inevitable legal fallout, fiduciary breach, theft of trade secrets, and focused only on the next click. The next evening, he sent Cleo a single message from an untraceable account. Meet. Old Rail Bridge. 10 p.m. She arrived with visible caution. No greeting. If this is another strategy discussion, she began. He handed her the drive. Internal compliance files, he said quietly. Unedited. She stared at it, then at him. What did you do? What I should have done earlier. She did not take it immediately. Why? Because she thinks this is leverage, he replied. It's liability. The river moved dark beneath the bridge. Distant city lights flickered against the current. If this is fabricated, it's not. She finally accepted the drive. Her hand brushed his briefly. Neither acknowledged it. You realize what this means, she said. If they trace this back, they will, he said calmly. Eventually, you'll lose everything. Maybe. She studied him in the dim light. No arrogance. No performance. Just fatigue and resolve. Why risk that? She asked softly. He hesitated, then answered with unvarnished honesty. Because I'm tired of calculating human cost as external. Silence stretched between them. The distance that had defined their recent interactions shifted. Not erased. Reconfigured. This isn't romance, she said carefully. I can't afford emotional variables. It isn't, he replied. It's arithmetic. She nodded once. Then we proceed methodically. Over the following week, they operated like cautious conspirators. Cleo passed the documents to an independent environmental law firm for verification. Eric maintained routine inside the corporation, attending board meetings, presenting progress updates, speaking little. Eleanor watched him with measured interest. She sensed deviation but lacked proof. At night, Cleo compiled a structured case file. Not a viral thread. A legal assault. The activists noticed her shift in focus. Fewer slogans. More spreadsheets. We're building evidence, she told them. Not noise. The drive's contents revealed a pattern. Accelerated approvals. Quiet adjustments to risk language. Emails from mid-level managers expressing concern, dismissed with instructions to proceed. It was not dramatic villainy. It was incremental compromise, the kind that accumulates into catastrophe. One evening, after reviewing a soil contamination report, Cleo looked up at Eric across the small table in basement coffee. If we file this, she said, it becomes war. It already is, he replied. You're not thinking about reconciliation? She asked. With my mother? A faint, almost hollow smile crossed his face. She doesn't reconcile. She absorbs. Cleo closed the folder. Then understand this, she said. If this destroys you financially, I can't rebuild that for you. I'm not asking you to, he answered. For the first time since the gala, there was no accusation in her gaze. Only recognition. Not of a savior. Not of a traitor. Of a man stepping away from inherited certainty into unstable ground. And in that instability, something more dangerous than outrage was forming. Alignment. Eleanor Whitmore did not confront her son in anger. She confronted him in silence. The summons arrived through legal, not family. Subject line, notice of internal investigation. By the time Eric entered the executive conference room, 3 attorneys were already seated beside his mother. No raised voices. No theatrics. Just documentation. We've identified a data breach, Eleanor said calmly. Sensitive environmental compliance files were accessed and exported under your credentials. Eric did not sit. My credentials authorize access, he replied evenly. Access, one of the attorneys clarified, not distribution. Eleanor's gaze never wavered. Did you disseminate proprietary information? She asked. A direct question. Years of conditioning urged him to deflect. Instead, he answered, yes. The word did not echo. It settled. One attorney began outlining consequences. Breach of fiduciary duty. Violation of confidentiality agreements. Material financial harm. Eleanor remained still until the list concluded. You will resign effective immediately, she said. Pending civil action. You're suing me, he said quietly. The corporation is protecting itself, she corrected. You taught me that language, he replied. A faint tightening at the corner of her mouth. I taught you survival. At any cost. At sustainable cost, she said sharply. You jeopardized shareholder value. You jeopardized public safety, he answered. The temperature in the room shifted, subtle but undeniable. Eleanor stood slowly. You confuse ideology with governance, she said. And you confuse profit with morality, he replied. For a brief second, something almost human flickered in her expression. Not regret. Disappointment. You were meant to inherit this, she said. Not dismantle it. Maybe it needs dismantling, he answered. The legal team began gathering folders. The conversation was over. Within hours, official statements circulated. Eric Whitmore had stepped down due to internal policy violations. Litigation was being pursued to recover damages. Media outlets pivoted instantly. The once polished heir was now framed as unstable, reckless, manipulated by radical activists. Anonymous sources suggested emotional volatility. The narrative sharpened quickly. Cleo saw the headlines before Eric called her. She's filing a civil suit, he said without preamble. For millions. Personal liability? She asked. Yes. A pause. Are you safe? Define safe. He had already received notice that his corporate housing lease would be terminated. His accounts frozen pending investigation. We expected retaliation, Cleo said quietly. Not this scale. She doesn't do half measures. That evening, legal representatives from Whitmore Corporation filed a formal claim in high court. Whitmore Corporation versus Eric Whitmore. Mother versus son was never written explicitly, but everyone understood. Eleanor retained one of the most formidable litigation firms in the city. Financial press framed it as necessary corporate discipline. Opinion columns framed it as dynastic fracture. On social media, reactions split. Some celebrated Eric as a whistleblower. Others dismissed him as privileged until consequences appeared. Cleo watched the storm gather around him with a tightening in her chest she refused to name. 2 days later, he stood in a smaller apartment he had rented under short notice. Minimal furniture. No skyline view. Just a window-facing brick. They're seeking asset seizure, he told her over a quiet call. If the court grants preliminary relief, I lose liquidity immediately. Do you regret it? She asked. The question was clinical, not emotional. He considered it honestly. No, he said, but I underestimated her. Everyone does, Cleo replied. Outside the courthouse, the first hearing drew press attention. Eric arrived without corporate escort. No tailored suit. A dark coat. Unshaven jaw. Eleanor entered separately, immaculate as ever, expression controlled. Cameras captured the moment they crossed paths on the steps. They did not speak. Inside, Whitmore's legal team argued that Eric's unauthorized disclosure had caused measurable financial damage and reputational harm. Cleo sat in the back row, silent, listening to the language of liability reduce personal conviction to breach metrics. When Eric's counsel responded, the defense positioned him as acting in the public interest. Whistleblower protections were mentioned, but not guaranteed. The judge scheduled extended proceedings. Outside, microphones pressed forward. Eleanor delivered a statement emphasizing fiduciary responsibility. Eric declined comment. That evening, Cleo found him sitting alone on a bench near wharfside. The oak still stood, winter air thinning its branches. He looked smaller without corporate armor. Not weaker, just unshielded. She sat beside him without speaking at first. She's trying to break you financially, she said eventually. It's efficient, he replied faintly. If I settle, I admit wrongdoing. If you fight, you risk bankruptcy. Yes. The river moved slowly behind them. You didn't do this for publicity, she said quietly. I know. You did it because you believed the data mattered. He nodded once. She exhaled, decision settling into place. Then we fight. He turned slightly toward her. This could drag you into direct litigation. I'm already involved, she replied. And if she destroys your inheritance? Then it was never mine, he said. For the first time since the gala, the distance between them narrowed without strategy. Not romance. Recognition of shared risk. Above them, the oak held against the wind. Inside courtrooms and boardrooms, power recalibrated. Eleanor had escalated from discipline to annihilation. But in doing so, she had made the conflict undeniable. Not corporate versus activist. Not mother versus son. System versus accountability. And no one could retreat without consequence now. Eleanor scheduled the press conference for a Monday morning at 11 a.m., peak media cycle. Location, the main auditorium of Whitmore headquarters. Official purpose, corporate stability update. Unofficial objective, remove Eric permanently from governance. By 8 a.m., the narrative was set. Leaked briefings to financial journalists painted Eric as emotionally unstable and erratic. A calculated move to strip him of his voting rights before the first gavel fell. If she could establish diminished judgment, she could petition the board to suspend his voting rights pending psychiatric evaluation. Clean. Legal. Devastating. Cleo learned about the strategy from Eric's lawyer at 7:42 a.m. She's not just suing, the lawyer said. She's moving to disqualify him from board authority on competency grounds. Cleo ended the call and stared at the evidence files spread across her table. The verified environmental violations. The internal emails. And one more thing. An audio recording Eric had found buried in archived board call logs. Eleanor's voice, unfiltered, speaking to two major investors weeks earlier. The residents are noise, she had said. Margin is signal. Sentiment stabilizes after displacement. It was not illegal, but it was unguarded. Honest in a way she never was publicly. Cleo called Eric immediately. She's escalating, she said. I know, he replied. His voice was steady but thin with fatigue. If she succeeds today, you lose procedural leverage. Then we don't let her succeed, Cleo said. Silence. Cleo, security will be tight. Good, she replied. That means cameras will be tighter. By 10:45 a.m., the Whitmore auditorium was filled. Investors in front rows. Media crews along the sides. Eleanor stood behind a minimalist podium bearing the company logo. Controlled. Poised. She began with market reassurances. Growth trajectory. Strategic resilience. Then she shifted tone. Recent internal disruptions, she said, have highlighted the need for stable leadership. The board is reviewing concerns regarding Mr. Eric Whitmore's conduct and decision-making capacity. A calculated murmur rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed. At that moment, the rear doors opened. Cleo entered with two environmental attorneys and a court clerk authorized to file emergency injunction motions. Security moved immediately. "This is a closed corporate event," one guard said firmly. "Publicly traded corporation," Cleo replied evenly. "Material information is being disclosed." The exchange was already live-streamed by at least 3 outlets. Eric, seated near the side aisle under legal advisement, rose slowly. Eleanor did not turn. She continued speaking as if disruption were irrelevant. "The board must prioritize fiduciary integrity." "Then let's discuss integrity." Cleo's voice cut across the hall, amplified by the sudden stillness. Every camera pivoted. Eleanor paused, finally acknowledging her presence with a measured glance. "Miss Marin," she said coolly, "this is not your forum." "It becomes my forum when environmental compliance fraud intersects with investor disclosure," Cleo replied. The word fraud landed like a detonation. Security hesitated, uncertain under live broadcast conditions. Cleo stepped forward just enough to be unmistakably visible on camera. "We have verified documentation," she continued, "that internal risk assessments were knowingly minimized in public filings regarding Wharfside." Eleanor's expression did not fracture, but her eyes sharpened. "Baseless accusation," she said. "Then address the soil disposal variance dated March 14th. Cleo replied instantly. A flicker. Brief. Real. Eric stepped fully into the aisle. "And the floodplain recalculation memo," he added, voice clear now. The room's atmosphere shifted from scripted presentation to uncontrolled exposure. One investor stood abruptly. "Is this substantiated?" he demanded. Cleo held up a sealed folder. "Filed this morning. With High Court as part of a motion for independent regulatory review." Cameras zoomed tighter. Eleanor recalibrated in real time. "Disgruntled former executive and activist theatrics," she said evenly. "Shareholders should not be distracted." That was the moment Eric made the final decision. He moved toward the stage. Not hurried, not dramatic, deliberate. "There's more," he said, reaching the podium's edge. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Eric, this is neither appropriate nor advised." "Neither was accelerating demolition without full disclosure," he replied. He turned toward the media. "Play the recording." Cleo handed a phone to one of the journalists already connected to the venue's audio feed. For half a second, nothing happened. Then Eleanor's own voice filled the auditorium speakers. Clear. Unedited. "The residents are noise. Margin is signal." Silence followed. Not outrage. Not chaos. Silence dense enough to feel physical. Investors exchanged looks that had nothing to do with activism and everything to do with risk. Eleanor stood perfectly still. "Context matters," she said sharply once the audio ended. But context was already irrelevant. The narrative had fractured. This was no longer about a rebellious son. It was about exposure. A senior shareholder approached the stage. "Madam Chair," he said tightly, "we need an immediate closed session." The press conference dissolved into controlled disarray. Security no longer attempted removal. Reporters shouted questions. Eric stepped back from the podium. Cleo met his eyes across the widening space. No triumph, only exhaustion. Within the hour, trading analysts began issuing cautionary notes. Regulatory agencies requested preliminary briefings. Eleanor retreated into a private boardroom, flanked by attorneys. For the first time in decades, she was reacting rather than directing. Outside the building, protesters gathered spontaneously as news alerts spread. Inside, the empire's foundation shifted under scrutiny not of sentiment, but of liability. And in the quiet space between accusation and consequence, it became clear. This was the point of no return. The emergency board session lasted 4 hours. No press, no phones, just shareholders, legal counsel, and a recalculation of risk. Eleanor countered every accusation with surgical precision, dismissing the recording as out of context and the documents as misinterpreted drafts. She didn't plead, but the axis had already shifted. This was no longer a reputational inconvenience. Regulatory exposure meant fines, delays, federal review. Investors feared stagnation more than scandal. By late afternoon, a statement was drafted. Pending independent investigation, Eleanor Whitmore would step down as acting chair and CEO. Temporary leadership would transfer to an interim committee. It was phrased as voluntary for stability. Everyone in the room understood it was not. When Eleanor exited the building through a private corridor, cameras still caught her. Perfect posture, unbroken expression. If she felt defeat, she did not display it. Eric remained inside during the announcement. He did not celebrate. He did not speak to press. When the official release went public, headlines shifted within minutes. Whitmore leadership shakeup amid compliance probe. Activist claims substantiated. Market analysts framed it as necessary restructuring. Commentators called it a generational reckoning. Cleo stood across the street among reporters and residents when the news alert vibrated through the crowd. For a moment, no one reacted. Then murmurs spread. Not cheers. Relief. The oak at Wharfside was still standing. Demolition orders were formally suspended pending environmental review. It was not victory. It was pause. Eric stepped outside an hour later. The media surged toward him, but he avoided microphones. He walked past the barricades toward the river instead. Cleo followed at a distance until the noise softened behind them. They stopped near the water, the skyline fractured in reflection. She's out, Cleo said quietly. Temporarily, he replied. She won't disappear. I know. A cold wind moved across the surface of the river. You understand this doesn't fix everything, she added. Regulators could still compromise. The board could pivot. I know. He looked tired, but steady. And the lawsuit? She asked. Likely withdrawn, he said. Public optics shifted. She studied him. You lost your position. Yes. Your inheritance. A faint breath. Probably. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable. Just real. Do you regret releasing it? She asked. He considered the question fully. No, he said. But I don't confuse this with justice. She nodded. Good. Behind them, reporters still speculated about criminal liability and corporate restructuring. Ahead of them, Wharfside waited in uncertainty. What happens to her? Cleo asked. She recalibrates. Eric answered. People like her don't collapse. They reposition. As if summoned by acknowledgement, a black car exited the underground garage across the street. Tinted windows. Discreet departure. Neither of them moved. She'll blame me, Eric said quietly. She'll blame you for being visible, Cleo corrected. There's a difference. He gave a faint, almost reluctant smile. You sound like her. I analyze systems, she replied. Including people. He nodded once. Then analyze this, he said. The empire isn't gone. It's wounded. Wounds expose structure, she answered. In the days that followed, Whitmore Corporation entered formal regulatory review. Independent environmental auditors were appointed. The demolition license was suspended indefinitely. Several mid-level executives resigned quietly. Investors demanded stricter governance oversight. Eleanor issued one final statement through counsel expressing confidence that the company would emerge stronger. She did not mention her son. Eric moved into a smaller consulting role unrelated to Wharfside. No board seat. No executive authority. Just a man with expertise and diminished leverage. Financially strained, but not destroyed. Cleo's organization received renewed grant interest once documentation proved substantive. Funding stabilized. Not abundant. Sufficient. Public attention gradually drifted to other scandals. But Wharfside did not resume as planned. The oak remained. The neighborhood breathed, temporarily reprieved. One evening, Eric returned alone to the site. The fencing was still up, but machinery had been removed. He placed a hand against the oak's rough bark. Not symbolic. Grounding. Footsteps approached behind him. Cleo. No chain. No cameras. You know she'll try again, Eric said without turning. Maybe, Cleo replied. But now there's precedent. He turned to face her. The city lights reflected faintly in her eyes. She said we'd regret it, he said. Will you? Cleo considered that carefully. Change always costs something, she answered. The question is whether the cost aligns with your values. He looked back at the skyline, where his future once seemed predetermined. I'm still calculating, he admitted. She gave a small nod. So am I. The empire had not exploded. It had fractured. And fractures, once visible, are impossible to ignore. Winter settled over Wharfside, dusting the rooftops and the oak in a quiet, inevitable white. Returning to their bench, Eric and Cleo sat in a silence that carried more weight than any courtroom testimony. It's over, Eric said at last. For now, Cleo replied. They did not need to elaborate. The neighborhood's fate was paused, not resolved. The activists still organized, but the immediacy of demolition had passed. Regulatory reviews would take months, possibly years. The corporation would adjust, recalibrate. Eleanor, powerful even in retreat, would not disappear. But the immediate threat had been forestalled. You kept your word, Eric said softly. We delayed her consolidation, Cleo reminded him. And you risked everything. Yes, he admitted. His apartment was modest, a shadow of corporate grandeur, but freedom had cost little in luxury and much in certainty. Cleo smiled faintly. You didn't act for recognition. No, he said. I acted because it was the right calculation. The distinction mattered. Not heroism. Arithmetic. Ethics in action. Cleo reached over and laid a hand lightly on his. Not a gesture of romance. Not performance. Solidarity. Shared responsibility. What now, she asked. We rebuild, he replied. Not for notoriety. Not for money. Just rebuild. The oak above them shivered in the wind. Outside, Wharfside breathed its cautious sigh of relief. Streets were quiet. Lights reflected against thin ice on the river. A neighborhood still vulnerable, still fragile, but standing. They watched the skyline together. No speeches. No social media. No headlines. Just two people observing consequences and considering next steps. Do you ever wonder if it's enough? Cleo asked. Enough for what? For all of this. She gestured to the neighborhood, the river, the city beyond. He considered. Enough is a process, he said. Not an event. She nodded, understanding. They had stopped the immediate threat. They had exposed wrongdoing. They had risked reputation, inheritance, financial stability. Yet, survival was not victory. Growth was not guaranteed. And yet, in this quiet moment, with the oak between them and the city, a fragile kind of hope existed. No drama. No fanfare. Just work to be done. Lessons absorbed. Systems challenged. People accountable. Then we start tomorrow, Cleo said softly. Yes, he replied. The snow fell thicker now, dusting the bench, the oak, the quiet neighborhood. Their footsteps would return in daylight. Their efforts would continue. The empire was wounded. The neighborhood preserved. And two people, exhausted but resolute, sat together, ready to face what remained. No illusions. No illusions of grandeur. Just reality, and the knowledge that, for the first time in months, they were free to act with their eyes open. The oak stood. Wharfside stood. They did too.